Secondary has called for a government campaign to shame parents who let children play with their smartphones. Katharine Birbalsingh wants millions spent on a campaign to make it clear that handing devices to toddlers is socially unacceptable. She also says phone addiction is stopping teenagers revising for their GCSEs and suggests children should not get smartphones until they're 16. Katharine is with me. Evening to you, Katharine.
Good evening.
Good evening. And Lindsay Cambridge is a blogger at Mama on the Edge and has 2 young girls. Hello, Lindsay.
Good evening, Stephen.
Hi. So, Katharine, let's start with you. Thanks for coming on. Set out for us what you mean here.
Okay, so the first thing we should know is that the big tech CEOs in California, people like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, when he was asked in 2010 about the iPad and what his children thought of it, he said, well, obviously my children don't know the iPad. I wouldn't give it to my children. It's too dangerous. The big tech CEOs, make millions and billions out of our ignorance and us spending money to support apps like Instagram, Snapchat, and WhatsApp, and also buying these smartphones for our children. Meanwhile, they are protecting their own children from these things. Many of them do not allow them any kind of data to access the internet unsupervised until after the age of 16. And that is because they know the damage that it does to young minds.
What damage does it do? It expands young minds, does it not?
No, not at all. There's lots of evidence to it actually breaks your brain. So it breaks the memory chain. You're unable to remember things in the way that you used to. It also breaks your concentration span. So when you read a book, there is a narrative in it, and there's a narrative arc, and it goes up and down, and you have to follow along for some time. You have to use your imagination. The problem with the phone and these various apps is that you've got lots of things shiny and bang, 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 bang in your face, and a book simply cannot compete with that for the excitement in the moment. And if you give a child that...
You've been very selective when you talk about the internet here. You've been very selective. The internet is this landscape of different things. It's not bang, bang, bang. The only people I've ever heard talk about negative arcs are BBC executives.
No, it is. So every time you get a message, it goes bing, bing. Every time you're on something, any of those apps, there are various bits of advertising that deliberately want to break your brain, because what they want is for you to click. It is advantageous to them financially for your brain to be broken, so that you will keep clicking on the various different adverts that show up. That poor girl who committed suicide was bombarded by self-harm images constantly. So even when she was trying to get off them and trying to ignore this stuff, she couldn't, because they targeted her. There are algorithms that they use in order to target children with all sorts of things to get them addicted. So there are addiction teams that are hired by these various apps. They're actually part of an addiction team, and the whole idea is to get children addicted. So, as an example, Snapchat, when somebody likes one of your photos or something, they don't tell you right away. What they do is they wait until you haven't been on Snapchat for a while, and then they tell you so they can draw you back in. And children are vulnerable. They're innocent. They don't have mature minds, one, that are already developed. So their brains get broken, physically I'm talking about, but secondly, they also just don't have the maturity to be able to make the right decisions in the moment and say, you know what, I'm not going to do this. Now, there are things, look, for those parents out there who are listening to me and are saying, but my child is already addicted, there's nothing I can do. Give your child, what I would say is, don't give them an Android, give them an iPhone. You can at least use screen time on the iPhone in order to restrict the amount of time your child spends on there, and then you can give them access to it for half an hour, perhaps 45 minutes a night. The key problem with the smartphone...
Katharine, there might be some validity in what you're saying for kids who are 6 or 7, but you're suggesting that a 14 or 15-year-old child does not have the capacity to understand marketing, to understand when they're being manipulated by advertising. They could buy and sell you, most of these kids these days.
No, I would say, in fact, many adults don't either. I mean, they know what they're doing. I mean, they're spending millions and billions. I'm fighting $1 billion industry here. The fact is, I know this. I mean, I know hundreds and hundreds of children who are saying to me, Miss, I so desperately want to get off it, but I can't. I can't revise for my GCSEs because I'm addicted. They will use the word addicted. They don't know what to do, and they're desperate for help. And for those parents who are working 2 jobs in the evening, well, they can't be there to watch their child. The key problem is that the smartphone gives your child unsupervised access to the internet. To be honest, it's more dangerous with the teenagers than it is with the youngsters. The problem with the youngsters is that you hook them on young, and so they'll still be using it later on. It gets them involved in gangs, in knife crime. It introduces them to the wrong kinds of people. They meet all sorts of undesirables. You've got young girls dating older men who they've met on the internet. You are opening your child up to danger. You wouldn't give your child a porn magazine. In the day, we used to put the porn magazines up at the top of the shelf, remember? Nowadays, you give a 13-year-old boy a smartphone, you're giving him access to all sorts of pornographic images and videos. This isn't even a magazine, right? Videos of the most horrific stuff. But parents don't think it through. They don't realize.
And you can get software to control that. You can monitor it.
So there we go. So, but you find me the number of parents who can use that software. It's really difficult to install. That's why I'm suggesting at the very least iPhone, because you can at least limit it with screen time, and you ought to be looking over their shoulder. So for those parents who have chess on the phone, and they sit with their 8-year-old and they're teaching him chess on the iPhone, that isn't a problem because you're watching it, you're doing it then. You're doing Sudoku with your kid sat there together, but you're not giving them unsupervised access to the internet. When you hand them the phone, because that's what normally happens, it's used as a kind of babysitter, and you hand it over to them and you say, here you go, that'll keep you busy. Your child could be going on to anything, and they are going on to anything. I tell you,
they could be going on to anything, and yes, some of it could be dangerous, but some of it could be very informative. Some of it could be educational. Some of it could be fun. Some of it could be them interacting with their friends and making new friends.
I see the interactions. I see the conversation on Snapchat. You should see the swearing. You should see the bullying. You should see the danger.
What do you think happens in the playground? What do you think happens when these kids go outside into the real world?
Well, I tell you, it's nothing like. It's just like we do talk with adults. When you're on the internet like that, you speak in ways that you just wouldn't do face to face. I mean, it's the same with adults. This has been proved a million times over.
Let's see what Lindsay thinks. We'll stay there, Katharine. What do you think, Lindsay?
Well, I'm just exhausted from listening to all that, to be honest with you. It's an awful lot to be faced with, isn't it? I think, firstly, we really need to calm down a little bit and think about what evidence there actually is to say that smartphones are harmful to our children. I think it was the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health carried out a study in the BMJ at the beginning of this year that said there's not enough evidence to conclude that it's harmful. I think we really do have to look at what is harmful, and parents, we have to err on the side of, as parents, we have the best interest of our children at heart, don't we? And I know as a parent, I do let my children play on my smartphone, and I do let them have a tablet each. And my 8-year-old daughter actually has homework set every week on specific apps on her iPad. And if she didn't have an iPad to do the app, she would struggle to actually get the homework done. You know, the way we're being educated now, the way we work, it's all geared, it's all computerized, isn't it? And I think we are doing our children a disservice if we should keep them using abacuses and books. You know, I think we need to be a little bit forward thinking about this, and I don't really think we should have such a negative view of the internet. Of course, approach with caution, as we do with everything with our children. But, you know, I think we have to be a little bit sensible here.
Go on, Katharine.
Well, we set homework on the internet as well. I'm not against the internet. I'm against unsupervised access to the internet, and that's what the smartphone does. Because when the kids are out on the street, they're coming home from school and so on, they've got unsupervised access to the internet. So when our children are doing homework, the advice I give to parents is: you're cooking dinner, make sure that the screen is facing you and that you are watching the screen. Because if you're not watching the screen, they will be doing many other things on there, and they will be accessing things that put their lives in danger. I could tell you the stories about Brett Bednar, who had his throat slit because of unsupervised access to the internet. And I could tell you about many, many other children whose lives have been ended. But it doesn't have to be that bad. It could simply be that they are so addicted that they then find it difficult to do their homework to the best of their ability. And what they're doing is they're rushing their homework through so that they can get back on the phone. I have got hundreds, thousands of stories that I can tell you about children who, in their teenage years, because we have children from 11 upwards, who are addicted and they don't know what to do about it. And the parents, by the time they realize this, you see, it's too late. right? And then they say, what do I do? And I say, go back 5 years and start again. That's the problem.
You don't think you're exaggerating?
Okay.
No, I am not. If anything, I'm understating this. I am understating
You're
the problem.
understating it.
But it's
I
your
really
shame approach, isn't it? It's the thing that you want a government campaign to shame parents. And actually, I think, really, you need a better approach. You need to be supporting those parents, be mindful of what else they could be doing to encourage a bit more of a balance and to educate their children that not everything you see on the internet is good and rosy, and actually you need to be aware of it, like if you walk down a dark alley at night, if my daughter was coming back late at night, age 18 or whatever, I would advise her, I would say, take the main road, don't do this, take a taxi, you're sensible about it. And I would take the same approach to the internet. But I think your idea of a government campaign to shame and using taxpayers' money to shame parents based on basically no evidence that it's
That's
harmful.
not true. There are lots of books written about the evidence that's out there. In fact, recently I was reading something about how physically children's brains are now changing because of the use of the smartphone. The fact is that once upon a time...
Did you read that on the internet?
Once upon a time... No, I did not. Once upon a time, if parents were smoking in front of their toddler on the tube, nobody would have said anything. Nowadays, it would be shameful. Once upon a time, alcohol was drunk in a way that was far more liberal than it is now. If you saw a parent blowing smoke in their child's face, you would be horrified, because that's the sense of shame that comes with it.
But is there any
Nobody
marketing campaign to shame the parents? There's no marketing campaign to shame parents.
No. There was a campaign against smoking. That's the whole point.
Of course, campaign against smoking, but I
don't know. One at a time. Wait 1 second. Lindsay, you make your point, then Katharine will respond.
I just think you need to... It's this word shame that really, I think, needs addressing. Shaming parents is only going to get their backs up. You're not going to get them to work in collaboration with you to achieve your goals if you are dividing to conquer. You need to really think about a better way to get parents on board and support them to help their children. I mean, we're talking about a massive age gap here, aren't we, of toddlers to age 16. There's a huge amount we could say about children at all ages of development and the impacts of smartphones on them. But I do think this word shame needs to be eliminated from the idea of a campaign.
Well, thank God that wasn't what people were saying about smoking at the time, because now things have changed with regard to that, and people wouldn't dare be smoking in that kind of fashion in front of their children. The same thing needs to be done with regard to smartphones. Once we make it clear just how dangerous they are, the shame would just happen naturally. It's not that you go out there campaigning for shame. It's that you would inform everybody. And once everybody's informed about the dangers of smoking, we then all understand that it's bad to be smoking around your children. Similarly, if everybody was informed about the negative aspects of unsupervised access to the internet and what you're doing to your child's brain in terms of breaking it, a similar sense of shame around that would happen. If we have warnings on cigarette packets, warning people about what it's going to do to your health, I think we need the same thing on smartphones with regard to young minds. I see the damage it does every day to children in their teenage years. It is not seen at toddler years. That's the point. You don't realize it until they're much older.
You can't compare it to smoking.
I think it's just as dangerous, if not worse.
All right. Well, look, you're clearly very passionate, Katharine. Thank you for coming on tonight. Lindsay, thank you very much.